How do you define success, and where should you travel in Mexico? Tony Vitello has the answers to those questions. He also has another team headed to the College World Series. Welcome into the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside the Knoxville News Sentinel's Mike Wilson. Mike was at Lindsey Nelson Stadium last weekend where Tennessee took care of Evansville in 3 games. And after Sunday's game 3, well, Tony Vitello had about a 6 or 7 minute monologue in which he quoted from the dictionary to define success. He recommended some travel destinations. He discussed Father's Day, and there were a few other tangents he went on as well. So, Mike, what was Tony, I guess, worked up about? Why was he defining success from the dictionary?
Yeah, it started the night before on Saturday when a reporter asked Tony Vitello a question that I think the root of the question was probably intended to be, is there a lot of pressure on the Vols in game 3 of the Knoxville Super Regional to validate the number 1 ranking? I think was probably the intent of that question. I don't know the reporter who asked it, so I can't really speak to that. But the question was asked very poorly, and the ending of it was essentially, do you have to win on Sunday to avoid this being another unsuccessful season? And Vitello, in that moment, said, "There's no way it's not a successful season." Thought he gave a good answer in that moment. Then came back around the next day and opened with the fact that Blake Burke, who was sitting at the podium with Tony Vitello that evening on Saturday, was really ticked off by that question. And Tony kind of talked about Blake Burke being a guy who's put a lot into this program, and that's why he was annoyed by it. Defined the dictionary definition of success, used the dictionary definition of success to point out he kind of gets to dictate what is and isn't successful as far as the season goes. Brought up the 2022 Vols, which I thought his comment about them was fantastic. He basically said, "Oh, you didn't like them, so what? They got you talking about college baseball. That's a success." I thought that was a really good comment to summarize what that team meant to Tennessee and the game as well. So yeah, a lot of thoughts in it, a lot of comments in it. But I think the overarching notion was Tennessee is successful. This season was successful, whether they got to Omaha or not. And I think maybe a really good comment that snuck in there as well was, hey, Tennessee's going to take a page out of Evansville's book now. Number 1 seeds never win the NCAA tournament, never win the College World Series, so house money. And I thought that was a really wise comment, and obviously a message to his team at the same time.
Yeah, and I was wondering about this. It could be a couple different things. One, Tony was really legitimately upset about the phrasing of the reporter's question after game 2, and it was still really lingering, burning still on his mind 24 hours later. That's possibility one. I also thought like this may have been very intentional on his part, this monologue, rant, whatever we want to call it, about success to sort of maybe dial down the pressure on his team, which is a number 1 seed. As you said, Mike, number 1 seeds don't win this tournament. It's been 25 years since Miami, as a number 1 seed in 1999, won the national championship. And, Tony already declared this team a success. He put himself in this team's corner, in this program's corner, and said, we've been successful. Basically, to summarize, he said, we've been successful for years, and whatever happens after they get to Omaha is sort of gravy. That's the icing on the cake. Omaha is unpredictable, all those things. And so I thought, like, option A, Tony's just worked up, blown off some steam. Option B, this is really using his press conference to intentionally send the message to his team and anyone covering his team that the pressure's off, they're in Omaha, they're playing with house money, and whatever happens from here, he'll take it. What do you think? Like, do you think he was just still worked up from the night before, or do you think there was maybe some intentional messaging here?
I think the interesting thing that Tony Vitello does a good bit is joke about, I'm not the smartest person, or, I'm not smart, or I'm not this. I think Tony Vitello is actually very, very smart. Very smart. And I mean that as a baseball coach, but also as a human being. I think he's masterful with how he handles marketing, media. He knows what he's doing, and it's intentional. It's not a mistake. So that plays into that second point you're making. But I think that there was an element of being really ticked off about that idea. I think the main message was, inside the building, Tennessee gets to decide what is and isn't successful. Don't care if you think it is or isn't. That definitely came through. And I think when you parlay that into what this 2024 team is, that was the message. The message was, okay, cool. You're already a success. So whatever you do now is building on success. So go play loose, because I think that's what you saw Evansville do, especially in that game too. Very loose team. Because again, you're a 4 seed. You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to win. And that's why he kind of parlayed that into this Tennessee team of saying, well, okay, it's been 25 years since number 1 won it. Why not go win it? Because there's no pressure to do it since that never happens. So I do think it was a message to the team. I do think there's an element of him wanting this team to believe that making it to Omaha is enough. So go on out there and play baseball like you know how. And if that was the message going into Sunday, the way that Tennessee played is terrifying for other teams in the College World Series. He's hit 7 home runs. And again, most of them were solo homers. I mean, that could have been a 20-1 game if there were runners on for those home runs. So the way that game went, if that was the message they were given before it, should be a warning sign in Omaha.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're sitting here thinking about the message he gave in the post-game press conference, and it's very plausible that he was giving a version of that message before the game. And as you said, whatever he was saying, he pushed the right buttons, and the team responded on Sunday in an elimination game. And I'm wondering, Mike, I mean, you cover college baseball as closely as anybody. You've been covering Vitello's program for years now. You know him well. You've been here for the rise of Tennessee baseball, and going into Omaha, uh, in the last 4 seasons, Tennessee has won 206 games. I mean, it's been one of the best programs in the country during that stretch. Now, obviously, it hasn't produced a national championship. So, if the definition of success is national championship or bust, I guess by that definition, then it hasn't been a success. But by every other metric, I think this program's undeniably been a success for the last several years since Vitello got here. He's turned around a program that had been really spinning its tires in the nation's most rugged, deepest, best baseball conference, and now, it sits at the top of that conference and is a power in the sport nationally. So, being someone who covers the sport closely, what is sort of the metric that you think, the barometer that we can define success as? Because I think about a comparable college basketball. We sort of use that Final Four as as the achievement where we say that's something you can plant your flag on. Of course, you want to win the national championship, but you get to the Final Four, that really feels like a successful season. And whatever happens from there, you take it as the icing on top. So how do you look at college baseball? The fact that the tournament is a little bit unpredictable, and how do you define success in college baseball from where you sit?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, on Vitello, the program he took over wasn't making the NCAA tournament. It wasn't even making the SEC tournament. So that kind of sets the bar of what this program was when he took over. To me, I view, the Final Four in basketball is kind of on par to me with making the College World Series. It's not from a team's perspective the same because there's 8 teams left, but for all intents and purposes, that first little double elimination bracket is essentially a semifinal. The end of that is a literal semifinal, but for all intents and purposes, that's what that boils down to. So I view that same way. And to me, in college baseball, if you make it to Omaha, your season was a success. Baseball is a very hard game, a very difficult game to win. One pitcher can turn a regional, super regional on its head. And that's, to me, what was interesting with Evansville coming in here for Tennessee is that they had a good pitcher on Friday night. And if that pitcher comes out there and does what he did to ECU, which was, I believe, 8 innings, 1 run, that's what turned the Greenville regional on its head, was that guy doing that. So if he comes into Knoxville and does that, Tennessee's down 0-1 going into game 2. So baseball is hard to get to Omaha, just with the structure. And again, the fact that a pitcher, or just a pitcher who doesn't normally do what that guy did, Kenton Deverman did, if he goes out there and does that, it changes everything. So if you get that performance, it really changes the tide. So yeah, wonky long answer, but to me, getting to Omaha is a success. For Tennessee as a program at this point, it's got a case as being the nation's most elite program for the last 5 years. the one knock on that is you haven't won a national title. So if that's the next barometer, which it probably is, I mean, when you've been to Omaha 3 times in 4 years and we're, let's call it what it is, you were the best team in the country in 2022 and didn't get there. You've got to win one at some point to probably fully validate and make that claim. But as it stands right now, I mean, Mississippi State won a title a couple years ago, fell off. We're good this year, but fell off. Ole Miss won a title, fell off. LSU was really good again this year after winning the title last year. But yeah, I mean, other programs haven't sustained this quite the same way. I think Virginia might be the only team that's been to 3 of the last 4 College World Series as well. Stanford might be in that mix. But what Tennessee's doing is rare for its program, but also programs that are perennially awesome for the past 15 to 20 years.
And this tournament, you mentioned the best of 3 series format to get to this point. I mean, it's kind of a survive and advance type of setup. However, looking back at the Super Regional, let's do that for a moment, because first 2 games of that series, and Evansville put up 14 runs through 2 games, 1 game 2, even took a brief lead in game 3 before Tennessee started mashing and removed all doubt in that game. But projecting that forward, was there anything you saw in the Super Regional that gave you any more pause or concern about Tennessee? I mean, we know Evansville throughout this tournament played better than its seeding, but the fact that they got to Tennessee's pitching staff some the first couple games of this series, did that make you rethink this team at all, or not really? Because in the end, for all the things that Tennessee does well, home runs and scoring has been its calling card this season, and that's what they did in game 3, combined with some pitching that finally arrived on the scene.
Yeah, I think you look at game 2. The thing to me that's always been the Achilles heel for Tennessee's team is if the pitching gets off schedule early in a weekend. They have very good pitchers, and I'm working on a story for going to Omaha on the fact this team has the number 3 ERA in the country, doesn't walk people, strikeout to walk ratio is phenomenal, doesn't put a lot of runners on, period. It's an unorthodox pitching staff that's been highly, highly successful, essentially with 2 openers, although Xander Seacrest has removed the opener label in the last month. That all to say, that remains the Achilles heel. If Tennessee gets off that schedule it has of Chris Stamos to AJ Causey on Friday, Drew Beam to whatever combination of bullpen guys you want to go with on Saturday, Xander Seacrest to Nate Snead on Sunday. If they lose that schedule, it can get a little bit wonky, I think, potentially, just because they have some depth on the pitching staff, but not all the depth options are proven to consistently give you exactly what they've shown they could do. That remains the risk, I think, with this Tennessee team, and that's what you saw in game 2. Nate Snead got hit really hard, and that hadn't happened in a while. Now, Xander Seacrest eliminated that issue entirely on Sunday by coming out and throwing 6 1/3 innings with 1 unearned run scored. And if he's going to do that, you're probably fine when you talk about staying on schedule or staying off schedule. But 2 months ago, that wasn't the case. If he only went 2 on Sunday and Nate Snead came in and struggled, well, Tennessee's a little bit worrisome at that point. But that was the only thing that I thought really went wrong. But I mean, the ball was flying out because it's Lindsey Nelson Stadium this time of year. Couple things went wrong. A couple small plays go the wrong direction at the wrong time, but that's baseball. And that's what I meant earlier about sometimes it's hard to get to Omaha just because a play or a ball bounces the wrong way. So yeah, I think that's the one thing though, is if the bullpen gets off in a game, I think things can get a little bit sideways on Tennessee. And frankly, I'd love to see Drew Beam get back to doing what he did his first 2.5 years, because the last month just hasn't felt like the same level of consistency. And if he had delivered his typical consistency on that Saturday, maybe that wouldn't have been an issue at all for Tennessee.
As we look at this College World Series, the 8-team field, let's turn our attention there for a moment. It really comes down to a 2-conference sport at this point. The College World Series is a combination of teams from the SEC and the ACC battling it out for conference supremacy, I guess, and supremacy to win the national championship. But as you look at this bracket, who do you feel like are the threats, maybe the top threats looming out there for Tennessee? What are the teams, if you're Tennessee, that you wouldn't want to run into? I know we talked last week, maybe there's not an LSU like last year out there. Maybe Virginia from the past is not I mean, Virginia's there, but from past years, that type of team maybe is not there. But who does profile as the top threats, the top hurdles to Tennessee in this bracket?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Tennessee, you might be facing the best starting pitcher left in this tournament in game one in Florida State's Jamie Arnold, a guy who ranks third in the country in strikeouts, sub 3 ERA, which has been pretty rare in college baseball this season. He's tremendous, and that's also a very talented Florida State roster. Yeah, other than Texas A&M's Ryan Prager, that is either the best starter left or is one of the two best starters left. So Tennessee has a big test in game one. They are kind of in the ACC invitational side of it, where they've got North Carolina and Virginia, whereas the other side is three SEC teams and NC State. I think on the other side of the bracket, the Texas A&M Florida game is fascinating. I picked Texas A&M to win it all going into this tournament originally. I don't know that I'll hold to that, given that they've sustained some injuries to some pretty notable players going into this, but Florida getting hot and playing like the talented team that it's been all year is really interesting. There's some shades of Tennessee last year, I think, in Florida, where it was a preseason top 5 team, expected to make a lot of noise, didn't quite have the regular season expected. And Tennessee's regular season in 2023 was a lot better than Florida's this year, but Tennessee hit its stride late, and I think Florida's done the same, obviously. So that might be the most talented team remaining in the field overall, if it's not Tennessee. So that other side of the SEC teams that are interesting, Kentucky is in the College World Series for the first time. They play a brand that, to borrow a thought from our coworker Aria Gerson, they play a brand that's pretty interesting in Omaha, because it's not a home run ballpark; it's a doubles and good baseball park, and Kentucky kind of fits that billing. So that's an interesting team on the other side.
What you just mentioned there, it's not a home run ballpark. How much do you think that affects this Tennessee team? Because as I said earlier, it is a pretty well-rounded team. We've talked about that, but we have mentioned, I mean, the home run ball. That's that's been the backbone of this group, and you mentioned as well. I mean, Lindsey Nelson plays into that to a certain degree throughout the course of the season, particularly this time of year, but. Do you think that's a negative for Tennessee at all? The fact that homers are one of their strengths, and this isn't a home run ballpark.
I mean, Tennessee's also third in the country in doubles.
Yeah.
I mean, they've survived with non-home run extra base hits as well. It's just a good hitting team, period. I mean, they are predicated some on the home run. They're the second best home run hitting team in college baseball history statistically. So they are reliant on that. And the Lindsey Nelson thing's real. But on the counterpoint, and this is a point I'm making, this pitching story I'm working on, that makes the pitching staff even more impressive. So maybe this is a situation where that pitching staff now gets to go play in a pitcher-friendly park for the first time this year and really gets to dominate in a different way. Because as much as Tennessee's success offensively is built from some Lindsey Nelson help, its pitching staff in theory is hurt by that. So kind of a balancing act there of both sides of it. Tennessee, the past couple of years, has been in Omaha, has also been a home run team, and obviously didn't have a ton of success. So there is an element of that, but it is a park that if you can hit the gaps, you're going to be fine in. And Tennessee's done that a lot this year as well, because that top of the lineup is just a good hitting group overall.
All right, let's circle back to Tony V here in closing, Mike, because without that man, I don't think we'd be talking about Tennessee and the College World Series. Totally changed the direction of this program, as you put it. Weren't even making the SEC tournament before his arrival, and now they're in the College World Series yet again. So as we look at sort of the landscape of the sport, the top coaches in this sport, I'm not going to ask you who the top coach is in college baseball, because I think that answer can get a little bit muddied. Like, are we talking about has had the best career, best in this moment? You could go a lot of different ways with that answer. So the way I'm going to phrase it is, if you were the AD, the athletic director of a generic SEC baseball program, generic SEC school X, and you had a head coaching vacancy for your baseball program, and could go out and get anyone in the country to be your coach, anyone within reason. We're not going to get MLB managers, but anyone in the sport of college baseball to take over the program. Let's do sort of your 3-coach draft here. So start at number 3 maybe and work your way up to the top, and we'll kind of react to each. So who would be your number 3 pick if you're the AD running generic SEC baseball program.
Well, I'll open, I guess, by saying South Carolina, in theory, just gave me a template for this, and Ray Tanner's supposed to hire Paul Maneri, but I can tell you Paul Maneri is not in my top 3 of that.
Is
Absolutely legendary coach in college baseball, legendary coach, but that remains an interesting hire to me. Great staff, good storied baseball program, but very interesting hire. I think if I'm going 3, it's kind of a toss to me between Brian O'Connor at Virginia and Link Jarrett at Florida State. O'Connor's obviously won a national title, has Virginia as a steady powerhouse, great offense, great program, again, a perennial College World Series type team. Link Jarrett at Florida State has also done a tremendous job, and that program was not dormant necessarily. It had a small slip after Mike Martin retired. But Link Jarrett had done really well at Notre Dame, saw that firsthand in the Knoxville Super Regional in 2022, and has got Florida State cooking. Talent-wise, they're tremendous. MLB prospects all over the place. I mean, first-round caliber guys the next 2 years on the mound and in the field. He's shown he can win at a program with resources, a program with a little bit less in the resources when you talk about Notre Dame. So that's a guy I would have faith in being able to go and build something. So yeah, O'Connor or Jarrett probably fits there in that third mix, and that's where I'd start
okay.
the list.
Turning your back on the SEC to start with, which makes me wonder where you're going next. Obviously, Tony Vitello, the man himself, is still on the board, but a couple other really really good coaches in the SEC that I think baseball fans are familiar with as well. So where are you going with your number 2 choice in the draft?
Yeah, I'm going to end up being a homer on this when I put Tony Vitello number 1, but I'll explain that when we get to number 1. I think my number 2 is Jay Johnson from LSU. He obviously won a national title in 2023, but the reason I'm going there is he's shown he can recruit and he can recruit the portal. I mean, Paul Skeens was a portal addition. Tommy White was a portal addition. They've done very well there. Luke Holman, portal addition. I mean, they've gone in, they've taken a lot of portal guys, and not all of them have worked out. I mean, Christian Little from Vanderbilt has not worked out. Gage Jump from UCLA worked out tremendously this year. Thatcher Hurd became a guy. So they've portaled pretty darn well, and arguably have gotten more elite talent out of the portal than anyone else, and that's why LSU won the national title last year. So I think Jay Johnson's a guy who obviously built Arizona into a power and then took over one of the nation's premier programs and won a national title quickly because he can hit the portal, he can NIL, he can recruit, and he has a powerful roster. So that's a guy I would have faith in going in and building a program pretty quickly.
Yeah, as I built this question, I didn't know where you were going with number 3. I was curious what direction, but I knew, well, I felt pretty strongly that Jay Johnson and Tony Vitello would be some order of number 1 or number 2, and obviously hard to argue with the success that Jay Johnson has had, and the fact that he's done it at multiple programs, I think is particularly impressive as well. Now, LSU, I mean, you should be successful there. People have been. It's a place you can win, but he stepped in and from day one did a great job there, and obviously reached the pinnacle last year. But you lean Tony Vitello in the end with your number 1 pick. Why is that? Because he knows Noah Webster's definitions so well, because he can give you travel recommendations. What is the reason why you're going with Tony V in the end?
Yeah, it's because Jay Johnson's doing what he's supposed to do at LSU, and that's the difference to me with Tony Vitello at Tennessee. Skip Bertman won big at LSU. Paul Maneri won big at LSU. Jay Johnson's doing it again. That's a program that's built to win. The same's true for Florida State and Link Jarrett. I mean, that's a program that's got a lot of history under Mike Martin. A lot of players have come through and a lot of wins. That's not the case at Tennessee. Tony Vitello has built a program out of nothing in many ways. When he took over, it's probably the worst facility in the SEC. I mean, they're taking recruits in side doors instead of the front of the stadium because that's where the facility was at. So it's a guy who took over a program that had no business competing for Omaha with its current resources, players, facilities, everything, and has turned it into, again, one of the premier programs in college baseball. So I give him the edge over a Jay Johnson, a Link Jarrett, a Brian O'Connor because of where it started. And so when you're talking about building a program, we've seen Tony Vitello take a program that had nothing going for it and very quickly turn it into a team that's churning out MLB prospects, getting to Omaha, winning titles, and doing things not seen in the program's history before. So that just gives me a little bit more confidence in the idea of taking over a generic program into something, because again, Jay Johnson's a great coach, a great portal recruiter, a great recruiter, but you start with your foot on third base at LSU.
Mm-hmm.
And that's certainly not the case with Tennessee baseball. That's just not what that situation was. So, yeah, I mean, on the Tony side as well, he can recruit, he can portal. Frank Anderson's probably the best pitching coach in college baseball. So, and that's who's with him. So that overall situation, I think you just look at and say, all right, well, that one can build a program, because you've seen him do it in the last 7 years in a different way than maybe others have.
Yeah, and I think if you're a generic SEC AD and had a chance to hire either of those guys, you'd be pretty thrilled with your hire either way. But while we're on the topic, I wanted to ask you just a couple other SEC coaches how much consideration you gave to Tim Corbin at Vanderbilt. Obviously, a couple NCAA championships on the resume for him. Now, those were pre-NIL, pre-portal. Has been back in the NCAA tournament year after year since then, but the peak of the program occurred, before NIL and transfer portal came. And then how about Kevin O'Sullivan at Florida, someone who's been doing it a long time for the Gators? He also has a World Series championship on his resume. They're back in the College World Series this year. Maybe a little bit surprising, the fact that they are, given the fact that they were a bubble team in the first place. But someone who is in the tournament year in, year out, was the runner-up last year, and pre-NIL, pre-transfer, won a national championship. So I'm wondering how much, those two guys are maybe entering your mind of this conversation.
Highly, and so did Jim Schlossnagle at Texas A&M, because that's another guy who does it at a really high level and has done it at multiple elite programs, because his TCU tenure was outstanding as well. Reasons why I didn't go in those directions. When you look at O'Sullivan and Schlossnagle, I think the advantages there are pretty significant in terms of what they have had. The access to talent in Texas and Florida is probably the best in the country. I mean, California is in that mix too. I think Georgia's got a good argument there too, but the access to talent in those states is outstanding. So again, there's an element of, you can take those programs and you have inherent advantages that someone like a Tony Vitello might not have had. Corbin would be the closest to me to being on that list. And if the question you asked was who's the best coach in college baseball, the answer very well might be Tim Corbin. I mean, a guy who's won 2 national titles, had Vanderbilt in the title game again in 2021, has done it consistently at a place that's hard to win in any sport, and turned Vanderbilt baseball into a brand. I mean, Vandy Boys is a brand. I mean, the first round picks, the MLB guys, it speaks for itself. But you mentioned why I think it was harder to choose Tim Corbin in that 3. He hasn't necessarily portaled very well. And I don't know if that's a Vanderbilt thing, an academics thing, an NIL thing. I don't know what's behind that. But the portal hasn't done great things for Vanderbilt to this point. And the offense hasn't been good for a little bit now. You just haven't seen the direction college baseball has gone. And the SEC has always been this to some extent, is power arms, power bats. Vanderbilt's not that on the hitting side right now. And I know there's some staff changes going on there, and that's very necessary. So I guess when I'm looking at building a program right now, it's almost what coaches you have faith in since 2021, because that to me is kind of that marker of when the portal era took off for college baseball and college athletics. So what have you done since then? Because building a program now relies heavily on building through the portal, especially to win quickly. So coaches that can do that matter. And that's why I think when you look at Corbin, it didn't fit the same way. Now, Texas A&M, Florida, they've both done well in the portal. They've hit big there. They've succeeded. And so those guys are right there in that mix. But yeah, I think it probably would have been Corbin 4 for me on that list, because he's done it for so long at such a high level.
All right. Well, we have declared this a successful run for Tennessee baseball, but they can add the national championship to the mix in Omaha. Would be the first in program history. And any way you slice it, Tony Vitello continues to do a great job with that program. Mike Wilson continues to do a great job covering that program. He will be in Omaha as long as Tennessee is, which We'll see if that reaches the finish line. You can find all of his coverage over at knoxnews.com. And thanks for stopping by and listening to this edition of the Volunteer State.